Hey everybody. So we got a good one today. We're going to be doing the Japanese style mid-length wallet. I made a big pattern. That's the second link in the description. And this is actually a special wallet to me because for the first, 7 years, from 2007 to 2013 or 14, I pretty much, not exclusively, but made a ton of these one-off custom bases. And that's how I made my living. So Japanese mid-length wallet is a 6-inch long wallet. It's about 3 inches wide. It's a big wallet for sure. And I did this one kind of fancy. It's got 8 card slots, but the design is cool because you have receipt slots under each of these, and you have a bill slot in here, but you also have under there a hidden card slot on each side. So you actually have 10 card slots total. So we have some of the pieces cut out, some of the pieces we're going to cut out, and then we're going to walk through putting this all together because it's not very hard. It looks pretty complicated. You just have to know what order to go in, and then at the end we'll do this sort of infamous center seam here to close it all up. And of course you can add a strap if you want, but we're making a very basic version. So let's get into it. So I'm going to start with a panel of Sedgwick leather. We're going to use this for the front, and then we're going to do natural vegetation on the inside. I do like using these panels because it's always been hard to get Sedgwick leather really thin, and Bakugai splits everything down. So this is about 4 ounces. And the white stuff you see is tallow, so I'm going to leave it on, but if you want to, you could just take a cloth and burnish it off, or polish it off, and we have a nice black leather here. And it's really, really beautiful. This is like real serious English bridal. So the only thing left to cut out is our front piece, and I'm gonna go just up in this corner here. And because the panels are cut with a clicker, you have a right angle you can use to have basically no waste, which is really nice. And I believe they do sell this leather in full, not sides, but I think they sell like backs and butts and stuff. But they're thicker, they're for belts and stuff. So the panels are really the only way to get this leather in this thickness, which is, I'm just excited to use it in this thickness. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our English bridle, and because I want to line this piece, we're going to skive this a little bit. So all I've done is I set my calipers to, it's a little over 1/4 inch. And I'm going to use this just as a rough guideline to skive because we don't have a bell skiver, and this is a good way to just get kind of a bell skiver result doing it by hand. Of course you need to practice, but we do have a good skiving video if you want to learn how to skive by hand. So this is just some veg tan, and you can use little pieces. It doesn't have to be perfect for the liner because a lot of this is going to be hidden. So I just drew out a little area here, and I'm going to get these glued up. Okay, so this is our interior liner, which will eventually be glued to the interior of the shell. The first thing we need to do is on our bottom section, we are going to basically make a card holder that we're going to stitch to this part. But we're going to stitch this part to our, let's call it our interior shell, in a way that's going to create a hidden card holder. On the pattern, you can see it's marked out here. So what I've done is I've already marked one, and I'll show you how I'm going to do this. So I am using the lines on my cutting board, but I'm also just using my pattern. So I'm going to set that down on my piece a little bit lower than the top, just making sure it's centered, and mark the tops. Then I'm going to put it on top just fully like that, and I've punched some holes in the corners here so I can make some marks. Now I'm going to go to my cutting board, and I'm going to make sure that everything is square, and I'm going to make my first line, and you can do this in pencil or pen or whatever. It's going to be covered by another piece, so you're never going to really see it unless you're really looking for it. But I'm just going to put my ruler down here and make a light mark. Then I'm going to recenter this mark on the line because they're not an even amount of inches apart. And then I'm just going to connect our 2 dots here. So now we know exactly what we need to sew. I'm not going to glue this though, I'm just going to use our double stick tape to put it down, because when you have floating shapes like this, my preference is to use double stick tape so that you know, or you can kind of move it around and make adjustments if you need to. Alright, so we're just going to kind of line this up with our corners here. And we want all of these lines to pretty much be even. And make sure you finish any edges beforehand if you so choose. So we'll get that one down, and we'll just do the other one here. And you can see how much easier this using the double stick tape is for a floating piece like this. If you ever have to pull it up and put it back down somewhere else, it's a lot easier.
How'd you do it when you were making them in college?
I would do glue, like a little bit of glue, and I would put it on this piece, and then I would set it down and pick it up, and then you could see the glue print, and then I would fill it in. So just make sure that glue sticks. Yeah, the double stick tape makes it way easier. And now we just have to punch and sew these 2 card holders essentially into this piece. And then a lot of you ask how we work in veg tan and keep it so clean, and the honest answer is usually we don't. So this is just some gum trag that it'll dry up, and if it doesn't, we're going to tan and oil everything and it'll go away anyway. The next thing that we want to do on this part specifically, because in the end, what we're going to do to make our dimension and make this close is we're going to fold this up and stitch this seam together. But in order to do that, what we need to do, let me just light, is we need to run 2 stitch lines and punch them individually. At least this is how I do it. We're not going to sew these yet, but so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my stitching chisel and I'm going to hang 1 prong over this top here, and I'm just going to punch from the top down on both sides, and that way we know when we glue them and stitch them up that everything will line up nicely. And I have kind of a weird spacing at the bottom here. So I'm just going to take my single prong, and I'm just going to kind of split the difference so that I don't have a stitch too close to the edge on either side. And for now, we're done with this piece, and we can start assembling our pocket banks. So this is a bank of 4 vertical card slots, and so when you're doing vertical card slots, things can get pretty bulky pretty fast. So I'm using a 2 to 3 ounce leather, and then I've also skived down the bottoms. You can also skive down the sides, however this is more on the 2 ounce side, so I didn't want it to be too flimsy either. In the pattern, there's a top pocket guide, which is basically just a version of our card bank all laid out. And you can use that to mark whatever pocket you want. You can mark all of them. I just marked the top one. And basically what this is used for, we put this in the pattern so that you can mark where the top of the top pocket goes. And then you know where to glue from. So now that we have that marked, it's a pretty simple process. We're going to take our 3 pockets here, and we have our big one for the bottom, and there are trim allowances, so we are going to be trimming this after. I'm going to flip all these over, and I don't glue the bottoms of the pockets, I just glue the sides. I've done that forever. You can glue the bottoms if you want, but you have to do less marking, it takes less time. We're going to stitch the bottoms anyway, but once the sides are glued, you don't really need to do the bottoms. And we'll just pop some glue on the T's and the little tabs, and then I'm going to just run some glue down the side here and down the side here. And then all we're going to do, I probably won't narrate through this whole thing, but we're just going to install a pocket, stitch the bottom, install the next pocket, stitch the bottom until we are ready to install our big bottom pocket. So for our bottom pocket, we have some trim allowance. So you can see my glue is a bit more, it's a bit wider to make sure that I catch the edge all around. We'll just use a bone folder to unstick any of this extra if the cards don't fit. And we're just going to slide that in. And then we're going to trim this down because it's time to trim everything up and stitch one side before we install it into the pocket bank. So I'm not gonna stitch, so the way we're doing this, we're gonna, and this is not going away by the way, but I'll show you how we're gonna make it blend in, because sometimes this happens, it doesn't mean you have to throw away the whole wallet. But you can see that there's a curve here, and there's a curve here. So I'm not gonna stitch around the curve, because this stitch line is gonna come up to here. I'm gonna stop the stitch line here, and then this will give us a little bit better access because you have a card slot under here, but then this becomes a 6-inch long receipt slot on either side as well. There's a lot of storage. So our stitch line on this side is going to end before the curve, and we want our stitch line on this side to end roughly before the curve. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to mark my stitch line like this, and we're just going to punch and sew this line before we finish this edge. So I have the edge sanded and or trimmed, beveled, and sanded down to like 400 grit. We're getting a little extra spicy on these ones. Just wanted to do something different. You can kind of see these are all dyed dark brown. So as usual, I'm still obsessed with the paint marker. We're going to do a dyed brown edge, but we're not going to paint it. We're going to do a hot stuffed wax finish just on the edge. So I'll show you how to do that real quick. If you didn't see it in our tips and tricks video, it's kind of an old school way to get that kind of glassy look. And it's pretty easy. So I am going to dye kind of over to here. We'll probably end up sanding a little bit of these edges off, but for now this will be fine. Okay. Once the dye's dry, we're just going to take some gum trag and put that on the edge. You kind of just burnish it as normal. Just with a cloth. Next, I just have a chunk of beeswax from Kaylina's mom's bees, actually. And I'm going to rub a bunch of wax on there. I'm going to go pretty liberal with it. Get around that corner. And once that's on there, I'm going to take my heat gun on low and heat it up. Now, just be careful not to burn your hand. Now what we just did was we just heated up the wax so it sunk into the edge. And now it'll get a little cloudy again. So I'm going to take my cloth again and I'm going to burnish it out. And we should have, it's not going to be a mirror finish. It'll be like maybe a semi-gloss. And this way, you're not just waxing the top of the edges, you're actually getting that wax into the fibers of the leather. And there we go. So it's a nice utilitarian finish. And it'll look really nice. Remember, we have, we over-dyed a little bit here, but we're going to be oiling this and tanning it, sun tanning it. So that won't be super visible when we're all done with this. And I like to show you guys, sometimes stuff happens, but you can still make a wallet very presentable if you have some stuff come up in the construction process that isn't exactly ideal. All right, so before we attach our card bank to this kind of supporting piece here, I went ahead and trimmed down our exterior shell because what we need to do first is we need to attach and stitch our inner liner to our shell. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing. I'm going to do my best to show you how we do everything though. So first step, the gluing up is easy. We're just going to glue around the interior liner and the exterior shell, which remember this is a liner, the outside is going to be our Cedric. all this is pretty much done flat, but you want to make sure that your edges are as even as possible. We will hit it with a sander. And we can trim off anything that doesn't look super great. But because we have all these holes in our liner, it is sort of, you gotta go kind of slow. And you might have to peel some stuff off, and then make sure everything is nice and lined up. And then if something like this happens, just lift it and kind of spread it out a little bit. And you can usually shimmy it into place. Okay, so now we have to stitch just the liner, so we don't want to stitch this piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark it from the inside, and I'm going to go around and mark my stitching line. And then all I'm going to do is punch from the inside out and then stitch around the outside shell. The problem is that, I mean, there's no problem, but with this design, order of assembly is really important. So you're basically just going to have to hold this tab up and do your normal punching. Once this is done, you're just going to go around and you're going to sew this up. So it's about quitting time for Kelina today, and I'm going to be in the shop. I'm going to order myself some dinner, and I'm going to get this sewn up and get our other pocket bank made, which is because it's the same thing that I already showed you guys. And then tomorrow we'll come back nice and fresh, and we'll finish up this whole wallet, and we'll show you how to take care of all these little imperfections that might happen, because there's really no reason to throw away a wallet or throw away a project when this happens. You might not be able to sell it as perfect, but I think, you know, I'm not, if you've been watching us for any length of time, you know I'm not the biggest perfectionist anyway. But stuff like this I always see as an opportunity to do a little faux patina, you know, see what we can turn that into. That usually ends up looking cooler than if we just left it plain. So we'll see you tomorrow. Alright, and we're back. So day 2, I have our whole front stitched, and you can see you just go around underneath this and stitch everything. And I made our second pocket bank. So now all that's left is we have to glue these together, stick them, stitch them, and then we'll glue our center part, and then we'll condition the edges, or the inside, to try to mask this little mishap we had. So, yeah, we'll just get to it. So once our glue is dry, what we're going to do is we're going to glue these up, leaving this part open because that's going to be our cash/bill slot. It's really going to start to take shape now because it's pretty much all put together. So I'm going to go give this a sand to get all of our edges even, because remember, we are folding this in half, so we want all these edges to be nice and even. And once I do that, we'll come back and we'll get this all stitched up. So once this is all sanded down and our edges are all even, I'm just going to mark my stitch line on both sides, which is pretty standard. And then the only funny, kind of out of the norm thing is punching this, because you're already sewn into another layer. But it's not hard. I'll show you how I do it. So I just have a piece of belt scrap here, and I'm just going to put that in between the 2 layers. And that'll just make sure that I don't punch through into the part of the wall that's already stitched. So I'm going to do, I like to lay out, actually, I'm going to lay out my pocket punches first. And all I'm doing here is making sure that I'm stitching my pockets in a way that I don't split, get a stitch in between the pockets. And the rest we can do as we go. So as you can see here, it's not the easiest stitch line in the world, but you're just going to use, I just use my finger to separate these two layers, and it's pretty easy going, it's just a little bit slower. The only thing you want to be careful of is that when you put your needle in, you want to be careful that you're not stabbing the back, so you want to kind of, I'll show you. This side's not that hard, but when you push it in, what I do is I push in and then I go up, right? You can bend the leather, that's fine. You just don't want to stab this back piece. So you put the needle in, push up and through, and once you've cleared this, you're pretty much in the clear to just pull as you normally would. All right, so we have everything, have all the edges burnished, waxed, etc. So all we have left to do is just our little center part. Now glue is optional on this piece. I am going to use a little bit of glue. But you want to be very careful because now we have pretty much a finished piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm just using a little tiny bit of glue above the stitch line on both sides. And you want to kind of bend it so that it's not going to touch anything while it dries. This is a little bit tricky, but doable. You gotta just kind of not be gentle with it. We're just gonna get this stuck so that the holes line up. Once you get a pinch on it, you're good to go. There we go. So now we need to stitch this up, and you can see that gives us our dimension so we can fold our wallet. And here we go. Well done here. It's a little still wet from the oil, but we have our nice Sidgwick front here. And on the inside, you have your bill slots go here. Then on either side, you have a receipt slot. And then you can see where our card slot is. So you put a card right in there, and that's on either side. And then you have 8 more card slots on this side and on this side. So that is the traditional sort of Japanese mid-length style wallet. So thank you guys so much for watching. The pattern is going to be in the description. Can't wait to see what you guys make out of it because there's tons of opportunity for tooling and all that kind of cool stuff. See you in the next one.